Hello, and welcome to this episode of PMC Studio, the interview show for Portland Media Center Studio Workshop. I'm Genius Black, your host for this episode. You might recognize me from the Maine's Black Future podcast or from Political Brew. Each episode of this show is an interview with someone doing interesting things in the greater Portland community, while people who want to learn how to use our studio and its equipment get experience taping this very show. Today, we are interviewing Peggy Akers, a veteran of the Vietnam War and a board member of the Maine chapter of Veterans for Peace. How are you doing today, Peggy?
I'm good. I'm pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, glad to have you. I like to just jump into some questions because folks want to get to know you a little bit.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. For instance, maybe what is your profession or just something you spend a lot of time doing?
Sure. So I was a nurse in Vietnam, and that's why I'm part of Veterans for Peace. But I'm a nurse practitioner, and I have worked in the Portland area for a very long time. I've worked at Preble Street as a nurse practitioner with the Teen Center for 25 years. I've worked with the city of Portland, and I had the real privilege of getting to know a lot of our unhoused teens over the years, even when I came down here tonight for this interview, I met one of them that's now like in her 30s and has children, but I remember her as an unhoused teen. So I'm not working at the Preble Street and Teen Center anymore, but I'm still involved doing nursing out on the islands here in Casco Bay, which I really enjoy.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that work. I heard that you attended Columbia University in New York during the late 1960s, and I'm curious what that was like.
Well, that's a really interesting question because it was such an interesting time. It was, a very political time, and at Columbia at that time, we were very active in what was happening on the streets of New York City. There were lots of demonstrations, and as young nursing students, we would go down to the campus and volunteer at the medical tents, and we used to hang all sorts of anti-war things out our windows. And so what's going on at Columbia right now that young people and young students can't even talk about, what's going on in the Middle East and Gaza, or they'll be punished, is just horrific. I think it's like so important for young people to be able to have a voice, and it's part of our right to be able to. So it's so different thinking that young people right now can't do what we did in the 60s, and
I hear you. The difference is stark.
It is.
Personally, I believe that Columbia, because of the history of activism and speaking out, is being used as an example.
Absolutely, yeah.
But because of, we understand that being activists and making a difference over time really is important. I wanted to ask you, before you were a nurse in the war, you protested the involvement of the United States in Vietnam.
Right.
And I want to know why you did that and what the experience of protesting was like at that time.
Well, I really, first of all, I grew up in a really conservative family. My parents were immigrants. We hung the American flag every Sunday.
Immigrants from where?
Excuse me?
Immigrants from?
Denmark.
Denmark.
Yes, my parents were from Denmark, and they were, my parents were just really patriotic, so great, so grateful to be in this country, and so we sort of grew up in this sort of conservative household. So when I got to Columbia, and the war was raging, and I was reading about it, and I just couldn't imagine that, and we didn't have we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have podcasts, and we just had to read the newspaper pretty much, or the newspaper that came out of Columbia, and I just knew in my heart of hearts, reading about what was happening, that this was wrong, and so it was very much against what I sort of grew up, learning from my family. But the other thing is, I grew up in a little town called Croton on the Hudson, and Croton on the Hudson was sort of it was a place where a lot of communists live, and so a lot of my friends' parents were communists. And my parents thought that on Sundays I was going to Luther League, and really I was going to young communist meetings just because I wanted to know, like something different from what my parents were telling me. And so I wasn't a communist, but I was learning about what other people believed in the world, and I think that was really important for me when I went to Columbia, to question authority and question what was going on. Yeah.
I think it's an important skill, and I think we need many Americans dedicated to questioning what's going on. I'm curious, do you think the Vietnam protests that you participated in benefited the cause?
Well, I believe with all my heart that not necessarily the protests that I was involved with, but I believe that the protests are what stopped the war in Vietnam. They truly did. If it wasn't for the people that stood out there day after day and protested that war, I think that wall in Washington would be wrapped around that city 10 more times. So I really believe that it was, and Nixon even wrote that in his book. He hated seeing those protesters outside the White House, and he wanted to nuke them. He just, and so I think that and that's why I feel so upset that we really don't have that ability, these young people especially the young people. I mean, us white-haired folks can go out there, and that's what Monument Square, that's who we are, mostly white-haired people, because young people just don't have that privilege like we had then to stand on street corners and say what we needed to say. They get punished now.
There's a lot of fear and control
there's so much fear
that's floating around. So after protesting and going to college, excuse me. Okay, yes. I want to shift a little bit to talking about the Army Nurse Corps.
Sure.
In the late 60s and 70s. So how'd you become involved in that? I'm curious if it was mandatory, but I just thought quickly of a question related to what you were just talking about before.
Sure.
A lot of folks that might be watching, particularly if they're 20-something, 30-something, they might not have context. You talked about protesting. We see protesting today. We've been seeing protesting. But you got to understand, how long were people protesting the war in Vietnam?
Oh my God. Until it ended. I mean,
really?
From
how many years was it?
So I was there in 1969, 70. I mean, in the 60s. So like 10 years. I think at least 10 years. It's a good question. I'm not sure.
And I remember that it was 10, 12 years, something like that. I know it was long.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is that when you said people needed to be out there protesting, and it was about the longevity, the stick-to-itiveness, if you want to say it that way, we're not talking about for 2 weeks or 3 months or 2 years.
No.
We're talking about like 10 years of protesting. Protesting is about bringing awareness. It's not going to change the law. People can't protest to make a new law, but all these pieces fit together, and sometimes it takes a long time.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just want to highlight that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
But again, moving to the Army Nurse Corps. Yeah, how did you become involved?
So my family didn't have a lot of money, and when I was at Columbia, which was only $3,000 a year, mind you, I think it's $72,000, something like that a year now.
Sounds about right.
So, the Army Nurse Corps came to the school, and they were looking for nurses. They were desperate for nurses. They, to go to Vietnam.
Whoa.
And so I don't know. Why did I join? First of all, they paid my last 2 years of school. They paid everything, the tuition and books, everything. But we didn't have uniforms, or they just paid school. But then as soon as I graduated in 1969, they were there. I thought the war would be over. I was just so sure the war would be over, after all the protesting and everything. But there they were, and we went right to there were 4 of us, I think, from Columbia that had signed up. And we went right to basic training, I mean, I had never even, as you're a nursing student and then suddenly you graduate, and usually, you get lots of experience as you go into a hospital and start working, but we just went right to basic training, and then, then we get orders for, Vietnam, and
wow.
It was really, and what's so different about Vietnam than, like World War II is we went on our own. We didn't go, like as a team or with a whole group of people. We just got orders and we got on a plane and we were in Vietnam. With everybody on the plane was going, but none of us, we weren't a team or like it was in World War II where people went as, battalions and, they...
Wow, because it was a long war. They were trying to plug in whatever.
Yeah, they just plugged it, they sent you,
Lord. That is just so intense. I'm sorry, I'm taking in what you're saying.
No, it was intense, and we went and we flew on a regular flying, it was called Flying Tigers with stewardesses, literally. And we, there was a lot of discrimination in the military at that time, and there was a lot of separatism, like, officers and enlisted, and they wanted the officers to get on the plane first, and like there was just no friggin' way that I was going to sit with the officers, and I sat next to this young kid.
Okay, wait. So that was built-in elitism, and you weren't.
Oh my
taking
God,
part.
It was awful right from the beginning. It's like it was.
Shout out the U.S. military. Excuse me, I didn't mean to hit myself. Shout out our U.S. military. I have a lot of respect, but I also understand, like many American institutions, there's problems, there's cracks, there's issues, and so I just appreciate hearing the truth from someone who experienced it.
Well, that was at that time.
I understood. I'm curious, what did you witness? I mean, when you were actually deployed.
When I got to the hospital?
Yeah, and I'm not saying tell me everything that's horrible.
No.
I'm
it's
we
important.
got a couple more minutes to talk. So.
No, it's important to, to be, so, we flew into this, one area, and then, we stayed overnight there. I mean, the plane, they literally let us off the plane took off, there were, and there was, you could hear the bombing in the distance, and so then the next morning they put me in a helicopter and took me to the hospital I was going to be at, which was called 67th Evacuation Hospital. And, they took me around, and when they took me into the intensive care unit where I was going to end up working, there was one of my high school friends in the bed, who was awful. He wasn't conscious, and so.
That was one of the first people you worked on?
That was the first, like the first day that I was there.
And it was somebody you knew previously?
Somebody I knew from high school.
And in Vietnam, that's just what happened?
Right. He had a twin sister, and the 3 of us, Joe and Helena and myself, we used to play together as little kids. And he survived, I guess. He was taken off to Japan, I think, the next day, where soldiers were taken to recover. But yeah, it was just, it was pretty intense.
Yeah, I understand. It's not like being a school nurse. You're out there in the thick of it.
Yeah.
I personally appreciate your service at that time, and I know that the folks there did too.
Yeah.
I'm doing a little time check. We've got a little more time. I want to ask one more question. Okay, cool. I know we're getting down, but currently you live in Portland.
I live in Portland. Yep.
What do you think of the Portland community? Just something a little lighter for a second.
Okay. Yeah, I feel really lucky to live here. I love the diversity in Portland. I love just meeting these wonderful people tonight from Sudan and Congo. That was a privilege. It's like that's what Portland's about. I just feel like it's a wonderful city to live in, and so.
Okay, so diversity stands out to you?
Very much so, yeah.
Do you like the restaurants?
Of course.
Of course, that's the little secret if y'all don't know about Portland. What do you like to eat in Portland?
Where do I like to eat?
Yeah.
I love Tu Casa. Tu Casa? I love Mexican food. It's over on Washington Avenue.
Okay, I'll find out about it.
Oh yeah, it's El Salvadorian food.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I love recommendations.
Yeah. But
All right.
I don't eat at many of the fancy places.
I'm down to try whatever, even fancy, not fancy. But that being said, we got more coming for y'all. But at this moment, we're going to take a quick break. See you on the other side. And welcome back. I'm going to just continue with questions. I'm going to dig into some questions. I'm going to mention seeds of peace. And real quick, just before I even ask questions, high level, a couple sentences, what is Seeds of Peace?
Well, Seeds of Peace was a camp that was started, I don't really know when it was started. But when I moved to Maine, I heard about it. And I just, with all my heart, just wanted to be there, So I would write letters, as a nurse, I don't even care what I'd cook, would I do anything. I just wanted to be around those kids, And
those kids doing what? Seeds of Peace?
Yeah, Seeds of Peace. They're kids from, there are two different sessions. There's kids from war-torn countries like Israel and Palestine, and at one point there were kids from Northern Ireland, and there are kids from India, Pakistan, Egypt, Afghanistan, and then there's another session where they bring kids, many kids, immigrant kids who come to Maine and other places, Syracuse, and bring those kids together to really dialogue, talk about racism, to talk about, how to make peace in the world. And they're mostly 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, perfect age, to really, learn about themselves and other people and the world. And it just, I was never part of the dialogue. None of us were that were like, I was a nurse there,
Sure.
there were other wonderful nurses there that I learned so much from. But we weren't part of the dialogue. Every day the kids spend 2 hours in dialogue talking about, how to make the world better, about, really, racism and climate issues and militarism and war, peace, and it's tough. I mean, these kids come out crying. It's really, so we're there for that part if they need us. But we're never part of the dialogue. I mean, I wish with all my heart I could just hear what they talk about. But it was just to be there as a nurse and to have them come in, and sometimes they just wanted to, sit and talk. Other times, they had, boo-boos. They were constipated or, had, stomach issues or whatever. It was just, you had this wonderful time to just sit and talk with them and hear about their country and hear about their family, and it's an amazing program, and I so feel so lucky to have been part of that for so long.
I can feel it when you talk about it.
I love those kids.
Yeah, no, Seeds of Peace is so powerful, and that's why I'm speaking here with Peggy Akers, and I've known a little bit about Seeds of Peace in the past. I've known some people. One of the kind of shared angels that we know, and our friend Will Smith, someone who's garnered a lot of respect from us as well as other people, was a big part of Seeds of Peace for years. But I just wanted to highlight that and say it's something so powerful about teenagers from Gaza and Israel or from other places that we know are in real life conflict. Before everything that's happening between in terms of hate is solidified and concretized, to actually end up in dialogue. And like you said, people might come out of a room crying, but I know for a fact that a lot of those teenagers and people came out of the Seeds of Peace conversations and camps changed individuals.
And change the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so hard to see what's going on right now in the Middle East, but I think those kids tried so hard to make a difference there. I think about them all the time, the time.
Such a powerful program to be part of. And Seeds of Peace is dedicated. It's about unifying, mostly about young people, opposing wars. How much of a benefit do you think it has on the youth themselves? I mean, we can talk about the world. Of course, I care about the world and the communities these folks are going back to, but let's start with the youth themselves.
I mean, what benefit is it to them to be there?
Yes, to participate in the program.
I never know. I always wonder what happens after they leave us. I know more about what happens with the kids here in Portland, or that are in Deering and Portland High School, Casco Bay High School. There was always a group from Macaulay, Cheverus, and those kids, go on to start, different groups in their school to talk about all the issues that are going on in the world. Some of them start LGBT, clubs to make a safe place, for others in their school. And I just wonder now, like with all that's going on in the world, what that must be like for them.
Yeah. Seeing
all the work that they've done, sort of being pushed aside or being punished, in many places they can't do that anymore, at schools, or they'll lose their federal funding if they have any kind of a group that is DEI or
called that, deemed that, whatever.
I know. So
I see what you're saying. So those efforts, the flame can't even burn and carry it forward. So of course you think back to them and
they leave there with so much. They feel so full. You just see them that last day as they get on the buses. Just like so full of love and kindness. You see, that an Israeli kid hugging a kid from Gaza, and an Indian kid hugging a kid from Pakistan, and them all hugging each other and hugging us, and that they're just so full of love and want to make such big changes in the world. And we don't know what happens, often.
Right.
They go back to their countries, and they don't have the voice like that they thought they could have.
Yeah, I understand.
And if they could, I just feel like the world would be so much better, you know?
We'd sense the change. Well,
oh my God.
I one of the things that I remind myself in these kind of situations is that light is light,
Yeah.
So the work, the breaking down of the trauma responses and stuff that put in, trust me, the world would be worse off if that light wasn't instantiated.
That's true. Yeah.
The same thing, dark is dark. This is why war is so horrible. It's the things that you think it is, and it's things you haven't thought of yet that go horrible.
Yeah.
Dark is dark, light is light.
Light is light, yeah.
I'll leave it at that. So, but thank you for sharing.
Will would have said that.
Right on. Shout out, Will. So we're gonna shift it up a little bit. I know you're a board member on the Maine chapter of Veterans for Peace.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know how you first joined up. Did you join as a board member?
I joined when I lived in California. I joined then. So a lot of veterans, when they come back, they do something called stuffing it. It's like, and I did that, whatever it meant. It's like I was never there. I didn't tell people I was in Vietnam.
Oh, whoa.
I just went on with my life. I still had a year left. I served my time at the hospital in Seattle, and then I got out, and I just, it's like, I think I was so shocked that the world went on, like that there was a war going on, and people were just like now, like we just go on with our lives, even though all the things that are happening, and all over the world. And so I didn't really get involved. But then when I went to school in San Francisco, and I just remember this helicopter came over one day. I was going to the hospital to bringing somebody, and I just, that was such a common thing in Vietnam, is the helicopters would bring in the wounded, and it was a hot day, and I just, like, I don't know, it just like everything came back. I just like, and I just couldn't stop crying. I just couldn't stop crying, and I just, I wanted to see if I could find another nurse that that had been there. You don't. We all left at different times. We didn't keep track of each other, and I don't think we wanted to. We just didn't want to.
That be our.
So.
Wow.
And so I went to the vet center, and because that was brand new then in San Francisco, and there were just all these Vietnam vets there that were just in their heads, they were still in Vietnam, and they were so, really traumatized. And I got in a group with them, and I ended up being a nurse again. It's like it's like just, sitting there. I was the only woman, because the nurses were really the only women there, except for the donut dollies from the Red Cross.
Wow. Okay.
And finally I started to meet these Vietnam veterans against the war, and that were speaking out and marching, and so I just, and then, out of that, I met Veterans for Peace people and just, got involved. And yeah, I felt like I found other people that felt the same way I did. Yeah.
It's very important to find fellowship.
Yeah.
Especially like when we're healing, we're healing.
Yes.
Doing healing by yourself I don't even know if it's possible.
Yeah, right. And it really helped, to be able to just, and then we started, when the Iraq War started, we started going to, schools and speaking in history classes. And that was just really important, to be able to tell kids, not a political part of the war, but our experience. And so it was usually myself and a guy who was a grunt, out in the field. And it was, the kids, it was incredible to talk to teenagers.
The thing is that, Peggy, it's also important, like you said, the image of soldiers or people who would have after effects of war. I remember back in the day, you used to call it shell shock, these different things. Yeah. It's not, the image isn't of a woman, especially back then. So I would imagine it's very important for you to speak and say, hey, anyone that was near the theater of war, would be affected in this way. Yeah. Because I think the gravity of war is lost on people. And that's why you were saying you were thrown at first by how the world just continued, even though the depravity was happening. Yeah. And people knew it was happening, but they didn't know that it was happening. Right, so I'm just saying I appreciate the work that you put in, but I know that what do they say? Representation matters, but it's just you need the stories from the people who understand it, and if it's not who you expect, sometimes that's when it's best. It makes you listen the most. Yeah. So yeah, shout out talking to the teenagers. I am curious, in terms of, is there a specific role you play on the board for Veterans of Peace, or are there any responsibilities or jobs specifically that you have?
Just not really, not no specific jobs, but I want to tell you a story about speaking out to a high school. Can I do that?
Please do.
Okay, because we were in Oakland, California, and we were speaking to a class, and it was a grunt, his name was Jeff, and myself, and the kids were, just talking and noisy, and finally one of the, and we were sort of telling our stories, and this one kid raises his hand and says to Jeff, he says, hey man, did you ever kill anybody? And Jeff, big guy, just like you remind me of him actually, he just broke down in tears, fell on the floor, wept, just made me, thinking about it makes me want to cry. And these kids, you could hear a pin drop, and he talked about, this little kid that he killed by mistake, and I swear to God, it was just like, it was, it's like, I don't think those kids will ever forget that day, anyway, you asked me about my role. I don't know, we just.
No. The story that you're telling is, I'm sorry, it's hitting me too, because, people aren't used to seeing big men break down and cry.
No, and
big men aren't used to seeing children die in front of them.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. When people lose the gravity of what war is, he wasn't about to tell them a hero story from the last action movie they saw.
Right.
It
was a real, and
but I trust and I believe that it was good for those kids to see that.
And that was, so speaking at high schools was like so powerful, always. It just, kids, I have stacks of letters from, high school kids, thanking us for coming. Just, I'd always bring them up to Seeds of Peace and read them during the summer. So.
No, and I appreciate the gratitude.
But we don't go into schools, and we can't get, you're not allowed, there's just no way to get into schools anymore, really. Teachers, it's controversial to have somebody for peace in their school. It really is, if you can believe it.
Wow, and we're gonna let y'all hang on that thought that is apparently controversial. But that is it for this edition of PMC Studio. We're proud of our brave studio workshop participants who have been operating the cameras and directing the show with little or no prior experience. If you've seen anything that looked off, that's because they are just learning, so can you. Just visit our website, portlandmedia.org, and choose workshops on the Get Involved drop-down menu at the top of our homepage. Also, if you would like to appear as a guest or would like to interview someone for a future workshop show, please contact PMC at portlandmedia.org or Brendan, Brendon, at portlandmedia.org, or Cindy, Cindy, at portlandmedia.org, and let us know. I'd like to thank our guest, Peggy Akers.
Thank you.
For joining me and us here, and I'd like to thank y'all for watching. Until next time, peace.